and just for your information, we are recording these talks and they are uploaded, so if you wanted to see them again, hear them again, they are available on the internet. So everybody, welcome to St Mary's Group St Leonard's. My name is Trudy Stevens and I'm, as a member of the PCC, will be overseeing this afternoon. I believe that most of you present will have already attended one or more of the previous events we've organised exploring the varying aspects of the evolution of our ancient church. As you are aware, these series have been organised in order to raise funds for the restoration and repair of the spire that proved so tasty to our local woodpeckers. However, our exploration into the history of St Mary's and the life and the work of Rosemary Motherhood has proved exceptionally interesting to the degree that the fundraising is now almost secondary, a sideline. It's not, of course, and I draw your attention to the ubiquitous raffle, which Margaret's selling tickets for us, and refreshments will be available after the talk, which we hope you'll stay for and give a small donation towards. As you are aware, we have had publications produced for the more historic talks. We aren't producing publications on these, but this series of 3 talks, we are looking at our beautiful churchyard. Now, you may or may not be aware that we are striving to become an eco-church. We have achieved the bronze status, and we're aiming for silver. And these talks help us understand a bit more about the ecological environment of our beautiful churchyard. So at the end of April, Roger gave a really fascinating talk about the trees. And today we've got Sue going to be giving us a talk about the lichens, wildflowers and grasses. And then next month we're going to be looking more at the fauna, at the insects and the animals that inhabit our churchyard. So it really is quite fascinating. And Ros has been very diligent and created another I Spy. She did one for the trees, so we now have another one we can go out and have a look, see if we can find some of these beautiful plants that are in our churchyard. Before we start though, just a few housekeeping points. Of course, for those of you unfamiliar, toilets are just out the door, left and right at the end of the corridor, and fire door here and the door that you came into. The phones, please, if you could put them on silent, if you don't have them. We haven't got mics because we're in a small area. If you can't hear, please will you just raise, and I will be monitoring, and Sue will just go up a level for us if it's not loud enough. If anybody's feeling a bit faint, I'm a first aider, and there is water at the back there for you, so please don't hesitate to just go and help yourself to some water. One of the really interesting things of these eco talks is the fact that we're able to draw on members of the church to give these talks, and it's absolutely fascinating to learn the expertise that is sort of hidden away. We don't necessarily know who has this. So Roger, when he gave a talk, it was fascinating to get his biopic and learn a little bit more about him. So when I asked Sue for hers, to see under what basis, she was very hesitant. Very hesitant. She was concerned that she was not really qualified on paper, but that she was a person very concerned about preserving our environment. And personally, I can think of no better qualification than such concern and long-term interest. That makes somebody really knowledgeable about what is going on around us. So she wrote for me that she has a long-term interest in the natural world, and she was very fortunate to have lived in the countryside where she was allowed to explore on her own. Her father was a great influence as he was able to identify birds from their song. He also had a wide knowledge of wildflowers and wildlife. So a country walk became very interesting, and we didn't know just how far we had walked. Sue has a science degree, but it's not in botany. But her lifelong interest in the natural world, I think, has been her best education. She's done a lot of research, particularly into the lichens, for this talk today, and they're not an easy subject and quite difficult to identify. She's found many wildflowers in the churchyard and the meadow, but of course we must remember that the flowers and grasses we see today are determined by the season. So in 6 months' time, it could be very different. Without much more ado, I'm going to hand over to Sue, who's going to introduce us to some of the plants and lichens in our beautiful churchyard. Sue, thank you.
Hello everybody. It's nice to see so familiar faces. I don't feel quite so nervous now. Anyway, as Trudy said, I haven't got a botany degree, so I'm not able to go into any depth with anything that we have. But I have done quite a lot of research on them all, and of course the lifelong interest. So we start off with the lichens. Oh no, hang on, I pressed the wrong one. Now these appear on the gravestones, and I was looking the other day, the gravestones at the front part of the church are nearly over 300 years old. So this was taken from one of them, and so this is possibly what has been able to grow over a very long term, because lichens are very, very slow in growth, and they look they're very sort of complex as well. And once you start looking into them, you just sort of think, where can I stop? Because there's so much to think about. The lichens in our churchyard belong to the Crutos family. I think there are 3 other families of lichens, but if you've been to Devon or Cornwall and on a walk, you've seen them like branches hanging from the trees. And they're a very good indicator of the pollution. So we get these here, but where it's very damp and the air is very clear, you do get these wonderful ones that look really pretty on the trees. So they are a very clear indicator of the polluted atmosphere. As I said, they appear on our gravestones, but the gravestones they inhabit are mostly limestone or sandstone. I'll just show you this next slide. It shows you a bit about how it forms, how the interest forms. The green bits are algae. Now, as I said, these gravestones are either limestone or sandstone. The lichen doesn't really grow on marble or granite, unless of course it's got a rough edge and then it can get a hold. It needs to have something to hold on to. And the gravestones here, the backs of them face west, and that's where we get most of our weather from the west. So the rain and the snow and the frost eats into the stone and leaves little sort of crevices where algae can form. And then, once we've got algae, we then get the lichens forming. And they have to have the partnership, because lichens are not green, they don't photosynthesize. So if they don't photosynthesize, they won't be able to grow. But with the algae embedded in them, they can grow, and that helps. So one helps the other. Because if the algae was just on the stones on its own, and we had a downpour, they'd be washed off. So a way of algae surviving is to actually encourage the lichens to grow around them to make sure that they can actually stay where they are. So there's a symbiotic sort of companionship there. I've gone off these, but this lichen I found, it's just outside the front of the church. It's rather crusty, which is probably what the crustose is, the crusty thing. I've said about all the weather coming from the west. And of course the graves here are all west to east, because that's the way we set out our graveyards. So, and this is another type of fructose lichen that we get. It's just sort of an interest. There are 3 different types of lichen on these stones. There's a black one, the beautiful orange one, and the this grey one. But they're all very flat. And here's a picture of the orange one. And as you can see, it grows out from the middle to expand, to grow. And it makes for the graveyard to be quite chill. Anyway, now we go on to the wildflowers. Now, this I think everybody will notice. No, this is the buttercup. There are several different types of buttercup. This one is called a creeping buttercup because it keeps quite low. There is another one that I've identified in the environmental area at the front of the church, you know, we leave long grass, and that's called a bulbous buttercup, which means it grows from a sort of a bulby sort of root rather than having tendrils. Ah, this is my favourite picture. Do you like butter? You remember saying that? You like butter. But this also has quite a serious point, because if you get this to work, if you can see those lines going into the centre, they're what are called nectar guidelines, and they guide the bees and the insects into the centre of the flower to get the nectar and to brush against the pollen so that they can pollinate them. And many of the flowers that I'll be showing you have these nectar lines. Now, the next one, these are all, by the way, flowers that I found in the churchyard. They're not from anywhere else, so you will be able to find them. The first one that we have in the, oops, that's the wrong one. The first one that we have in the meadow is this one, the white campion. Now, there is another one called the bladder campion. And this, as you can see, the petals on the leaf, on the flowers, are a lot more sort of smaller and scraggly. But behind them, they have these really big calyxes, whereas the, you see there's much smaller on the white campion. So there's a way of telling the difference between the two plants. Now this looks absolutely beautiful at the moment, this sheep sorrel. It's very slender and very delicate looking, and that's found in the meadow and also at the front of the church. It's quite common, but just rather pretty. Now this is the dog rose, or what we call the unofficial English rose. And I don't know if you remember back in time, we used to have Alexandra Rose Day for the Alexandra nurses, and this was their emblem. And then the hips that come in the autumn after the roses, they're really ablaze in our hedgerows in the winter. But I don't know, the flesh, we make rosehip syrup, which is full of vitamin C. I know I used to go and buy bottles of it from the clinic to give to the children when they were babies. But the pips are poisonous. So although birds may eat these, they don't eat the pips. Or if they do eat the pips by mistake, they come out because they can't digest them. Right. Now these are the members of the pea family, and they grow very like peas, and they produce pods like peas. This is the common vetch, and it throws out sort of tendrils so that it can climb, and you don't find it as an individual flower. It climbs through other flowers to get to the top and to get to the light to produce the flowers. And then these flowers then get pollinated and they form seed pods like peas. And of course, when they dry out, they open, the seeds drop in the ground, ready for germination next year. This one, if you walked up through to the meadow recently, you will have seen clumps of this beautiful sainfoin. It's absolutely beautiful. It's quite tall and it stands out amongst the grass, and it's a beautiful pink. And it's another member of the pea family. And the pea families, they have these roots. There. And can you see they have these nodules on the roots? Now these nodules contain a bacteria. And in the old days, when we used to do rotation farming, we used to have a field of wheat, and then they would sow clover for a year. And clover has exactly the same things on its roots. And that bacteria helps to fix the nitrogen into the soil, so therefore it is an aid for fertilising the next crop. And it obviously, I think we're beginning to start to use that system again because of cutting down on the nitrogen fillers that they put onto farmland. This is the hedgerow cranesbill. It's a pretty little flower, quite inconspicuous, but if you find it, it does give you a little bit of a lift. And it's called cranesbill because of this seed that it produces. It looks rather like a crane's bill. And when it dries out, when it's dry, it curls up its seeds so that then they fling out, so that they can then propagate elsewhere, away from the mother plant. So it's a very clever little plant. Now the calf parsley, the umbellifer family, so called because it's rather like an umbrella, the seed, the quite actual flower head, although it's all branched out with lots of little flowers on it as well. And Margaret, who does the flower arranging in the church, often she will use it as the flower arrangement by the altar in the time when it's at its peak. And it looks really like lace, it's really pretty. And another umbellifer is the hogweed, which is much stronger. And this one, you can find it at the lich gate, on the outside by the lich gate. And the flowers are sometimes mostly white, but sometimes they're pink. And I forgot to tell you, the parsley has hollow stems, and I don't know if when your children were little, they used to cut them and make pea shooters out of them. So they have a very variety of uses. The green alkanet. This is a rather rapid spreading perennial. Initially it's thought to have been a garden escape, but it seems to like to grow everywhere. It has beautiful bright blue flowers, and again, where am I? Here. They have little honey guides around their petals, if you look closely, little white lines showing the bees and the pollinators where to go. So it's a very pretty plant, it's a lovely bright blue. So you can quite see why people might like to have it in their gardens. Now, this is the white dead nettle, so called because it doesn't sting, which is good. This here, these little bits here, when I was a child I was told they were fairies' shoes. That's where the fairies used to put their shoes. But in actual fact, they are the pollen, so that when the bee or the insect goes into the flower to get the nectar, they brush against that pollen, so that when they next visit the next flower, they are actually pollinating the flower. They look pretty pretty. Right, this is the cuckoo flower. Now, I only managed to get one picture of that, this one here, because they were rarely over. Because they come and they're in evidence when the cuckoo arrives. So at the beginning of April, when the cuckoo arrives, we see these. And these line up on the right-hand side of the church path as you walk up into the church. And they're there for you to see. Now this is an odd one, because it likes to have a wet area to grow in. And an area I found it in wasn't really very wet. So it's called the comfrey, a common comfrey. So I don't really know if we're going to have it next year or whether it's just a fake thing that happens now and again. And it's certainly interesting to go back and have a look for it next year. This one's lovely. The little speedwell. Again, you can see it has the white honey lines to direct the bees in for germination, and it flowers between April and July. This is an amazing plant. It doesn't look much, but it's extremely useful. And in times past, when herbalists used to make up our own medicines, they used to use the leaves of this plant. And I'll tell you some of the things that they used to use it for. It was used as an antihistamine, and it's very effective in dealing with nettle stings. The dogs, we always tell rub with the dog, but that's just a placebo. If you rub it with a ribwork plantain, apparently it just goes. It can also, the leaves can make a tea, which is an effective cough medicine. And the word wart means wound. And so in the past they used to mash up the leaves, chew them or mash them, and then lay them on the wound to stop bleeding. So, it's a very useful plant. And the last thing I'm going to tell you, because there's several other bits, is that you can collect the leaves and dry them, crunch them up and put them into olive or almond oil. Leave them for 4 to 6 weeks, then strain off the oil and mix it with melted beeswax. And then you get a lovely salve, and if you've got sore hands or a scratch or something, you just put that on. It's apparently very, very healing. But although I'm telling you this, I don't expect you to rush out and have a go, because I'm not a herbalist and nor are you. So please don't go and take any risks. But it's just fascinating. When I was researching it, I just thought, my word, such a really inconspicuous plant to have so many properties. This was my bugbear when the children were
Yes.
This is called one of the bed cleavers, and it's the most common. It's got a very insignificant little white flower, but of course when it's pollinated it turns into these little sticky balls. And the idea of that is so that when animals are forcing themselves through the undergrowth, the little seeds, balls, stick to their fur, and then of course they drop off, so therefore they multiply. My washing machine didn't like them. But no, it's just amazing when you really look into these wild flowers, just what they do. Right, this is ladies' bed straw. The photograph on the right there was one I took because it hadn't come out. And then we found one that was out, well, a photograph of it. It also has medicinal properties and rather sort of interesting ones really, because it can be used to treat cancer, epilepsy, hysteria spasms, tumours, loss of appetite, and lung and chest ailments, just from a plant. You know, so the people sort of scoff at herbalists and say, you know, sort of, it's crap medicine, but really, in the past, these were the only things that people had that they could use. And so that I thought was very interesting. And also, it's used as a natural dye. So that's very good. And I forgot to tell you, when we were looking at the lichens, if you don't mind going back a bit, the lichens are collected in Scotland, and they use those lichens to produce the colours of yellow, orange and brown in the Harris tweed. And they're still doing that today. And it also provides nesting material for long-tailed tits. So, back to the flowers. The daisy family. The daisies have been beautiful this year. The chap that mows my lawn said that he mowed the daisies and buttercups but couldn't find the grass. So they've been absolutely beautiful. And this one here is the lawn daisy. But this one is the oxeye daisy. Now that has been